Welcome. I'm Greg Lowe. This is a podcast in the Tech Career for Life series where we talk about how to build successful long-term careers in technology. My guest today is Drew Robbins. Drew is a seasoned leader and mentor with over 20 years of experience guiding professionals through real-world challenges of building meaningful careers. He's worked across the US, Japan, and India, leading teams at Microsoft and shaping how organizations adopt and apply emerging technologies like generative AI. And Drew says his mission is to help people build purposeful careers through practical insight, emotional honesty, and focus on long-term growth. I've also recently finished reading his book, which is the When No One's Keeping a Secret, which is you'll see No One Keeping Score, which you'll see in the background behind Drew there, and thought he'd be a perfect guest for the show. So welcome, Drew.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Greg. I look forward to the conversation and happy to reconnect with you as well.
Awesome. And so listen, tell us, for people who don't know who you are and where you're at, so what do you do now?
What do I do? I should know that, shouldn't I? Right now I'm working at Microsoft. I've been working at Microsoft for 20 years now. And obviously right now we do a lot around helping our customers understand how to apply AI technologies to their business processes and get value from it, as they're using it to kind of optimize their internal processes, to let people focus more in on the things that create the most value, and possibly find additional new products that they can go and bring to market. Like I said, I've been at Microsoft for 20 years. I started out in Ohio, where I was born, in the United States. I lived in Seattle, Washington, and worked at the headquarters for several years. And then for the last decade now, a little bit over a decade, I've been working in Tokyo, Japan, for various roles, either working for the Japan subsidiary or just working from here, working with different customers. So.
Quite a different experience living in Japan. Many years ago in the 1990s, I did a bit of work for the US Navy, where I was in Japan for periods of time, and so on. And so got an interesting experience, sort of spending time in Japan. It's one of my favorite places, I have to say. So that's great.
Me too. I came for only 2 years, and I'm still here, 11 years later.
Well, it was really interesting that there were a lot of the military guys that I was working with from the Navy who had come there, and they had no intention of ever going home.
Okay.
They'd meet a local, they'd get married, and they just were determined to stay there for good. And I think it's just that they saw a different way of living and decided that was it for them.
Yeah, it's very different culture, and very respectful culture, and with everything going on in the world, it's a very calm place to live right now, which feels good. But I actually live near a U.S. Navy base. I don't know where you were positioned out of, but
the ones that I was mostly working with were at Yokosuka. And the other one was Zama, actually, which was one of my favorite ones, because Zama, the base there was an Imperial Japanese Army base back to the 1300s. So when you go on the base, there's architecture there that's it's like walking into a Shogun movie or something.
That's nice.
It's just completely beautiful, and it feels a bit weird because the Japanese people don't really get to see it because it's a US base, right? So
that's true,
and yet it's got all this just completely amazing architecture on the base. But
I see.
Yeah, certainly Yokosuka was different. That was when I was there. It was like the home of the Seventh Fleet or whatever, and it had all the big boys' toys. You could see up close.
It's fun to go over there and see all the big ships. I live very near to Yokosuka as well. In fact, at the beginning of the book, it talks about sitting in a restaurant on the seaside restaurant, and that's on my side of the peninsula, the opposite side of Yokosuka. So just to give you
actually, one thing that puzzled me when I talked to the locals. I I said, like, looking across the water to where the base was, I remember saying to locals, "How do you feel about having that there?" You know,
Uh,
and I was surprised. What they said was safe, actually, and it
okay.
was, they were living in a world where crazy people were lobbing missiles at them just to scare them and all this sort of stuff, and
Hmm.
so yeah, they were living in a very different world to what we are. And so, yeah, no, it was really interesting to see that. But listen, what I found fascinating in the book as I was going through it, first up, the long term Microsoft stuff. I've personally been in the regional director program for a very long time now. And so it was quite fascinating to see the discussions about Scott Guthrie and Scott Hanselman and all these various people I've sort of done things with over the years. And in fact, I remember Scott Guthrie when he first came along and showed us what he'd basically built ASP.NET over the weekend, effectively. And
That's
so on.
right.
We were at
That's right.
some
Yeah.
barbecue with him, and Hanselman, of course, Scott used to be one of the RDs himself,
Hmm.
and so yeah, then
Yeah.
he sort of went on. So there was certainly a whole evangelism role there, and the work that you've been doing, is it mostly evangelism type work, or do you get involved in deep technical stuff as well?
So I started out in an evangelist role, although even the evangelist role has always been fairly technical.
Oh yeah.
We like my first job at Microsoft was really going to enterprise customers during the day and going deep on some technology. And it could be like we were supporting basically the sales teams in my
Hmm.
region. And the sales teams had all kinds of different products that they needed to go sell. So one day you might need to go and present on .NET and tell Java developers why they should love Microsoft.NET. You might need to present on Silverlight if you remember that. And I remember doing
Indeed.
like these all night
All of the
sessions.
discussions around
That's
that
right.
one. Yep.
But you would do these all night study sessions just to make sure you're deeply like ready to have this conversation
Yeah.
because you were certainly going in a room with customers that knew what they were talking about.
Hmm.
And so I did do evangelism for quite a while. In fact, I was a regional director right before I started at
Hmm.
Microsoft, and I don't know if we overlapped there, but
Must have
I was in that
been
community as well.
it must have been very close if it wasn't. Yeah. So
Yes, it would have been 21 years ago now. So
yeah, I
um,
think I started in 2003. I think it
okay,
was.
there you go. Yeah,
Yep.
so we had
Indeed.
a little bit less gray hair at the time, but
Mm, yeah,
um,
indeed.
but yeah, and so I actually followed that organization to corp, and so I joined kind of the headquarters version of the organization, which became a globally supportive role.
Hmm.
And then you're more specifically focused on a single technology. And so at the time, I was focused on Internet Information Server, if you remember
Yes,
that product. I think it's still there somewhere buried in Windows
it
Server.
is indeed. Yeah.
And but I was focused on that. I was focused on Azure for a little while. I was focused, unfortunately or fortunately, Windows 8 for a while. And then I made the move to Japan, and I was actually still in the evangelism org, but back
Mm,
into the field in a different part of the world. And that I was brought in to kind of help open up the door to what was a very separated part of the organization because it was in Japan and the culture and the gaps between the U.S. and Japan. Um,
mm,
my boss at the time recognized that, and she wanted to bring me in to help build that bridge back to the U.S. And again, that was
mm.
going to be 2 years. I was going to help build this bridge and come back, and now I'm still here.
And you're still
Um,
there. Yeah.
yeah.
But listen, one big thing I want to ask you about. I suppose if people are building out technical careers, there are often two tracks. One is people end up in sort of consulting, mentoring
Hmm.
in private companies, or they tend to end up in quite large companies.
Mm.
And you've tended to be pretty much in the large company role, but how do you see the difference between the two?
Yeah, I before I joined Microsoft as a regional director, I was in consulting, and those
Mm.
were all small companies. Um, but I did find, I guess, if I recall, I found that background of coming from that consulting company to be a little bit helpful inside Microsoft because in a
Yeah.
big company, you tend to get involved in a lot of different politics, right? You tend to get
Hmm.
involved in trying to navigate the organization and both create and promote value that you're providing, as well as your team's providing, as well as your organization's providing, and and make sure that that all gets seen within this huge context, which you could easily get lost within.
Mm.
And coming in as a consultant, you kind of separated yourself emotionally from that because
Yeah.
when you're as a consultant, you're working for a company, you you don't have the opportunity to get involved emotionally. You know
Mm.
that this contract's going to end at some point. And so that was helpful. It doesn't mean that I didn't at sometimes fall back into like the employee that's part of the big company eventually,
Yeah.
but that definitely helped at first and has helped me at different times to remind myself, hey, this is, in a sense, yes, a long-term contract with Microsoft still, and I can separate myself from kind of the big company politics and
Mm.
find places I can get, in a sense in the book I say be present. It helps me be a little bit more present around what is the value that I need to create right now in this role
Mm.
for my customers and for the people that I'm working with.
In fact, that's one of the first main bullet points that in the list of things you had in the book was being present. So I think, yeah, just like to hear more from you as to what you're thinking there.
Yeah, that one, I start out there because I feel like number one, it's a big challenge for me. I tend to
Mhm.
be a person that will float off somewhere and kind of think about other things as even as a conversation is going on. I'll think about how I want the next sentence to be, or I'll think about something will trigger me and I'll think about a whole plan and come back and then rejoin the conversation. And so this idea of presence is, both being present in the moment and then also when you're going through different transitions in life, it's very easy to get either regretful about the past or to worry too much about the future. And so
Mhm.
a big part of that be present theme is getting back on solid ground in the moment and understanding the things that are opportunities right now that and the steps I can take to just fill in a little bit of data, to fill in the
Mm.
ambiguity with a little bit more data and take that right next step. And I talk
It,
about in the
it's
book
sort of,
the things that
um,
you would miss because of that, right? So,
I do wonder though, with people walking around with distractions
oh yeah.
all the time. And so when we do have meetings nowadays, it's quite common for people to be very distracted in meetings and things.
Mhm.
And do you have any good ways of getting around that? Or, I mean, do you look at, getting people to put phones away or not take them to meetings, or do you just reassess the value of meetings at all?
I well, that's a really the last one's a really good point. Is like reassess the
Mm.
value of meetings at all. I mean, there's certainly times where the meetings are important for us to all get in a room and or online and talk to each other. But there is this problem that was coming up even before the pandemic, which was the distraction of these devices. You see so often people will go into a meeting and they'll bring their laptop, open it up, and then they kind of head nod the meeting, but they're typing off some email and then they
Yeah,
come back. And I don't know, some
unrelated.
people seem to have this magic trick of like being able to do both, but most people don't.
I think they
And
don't do it well,
yeah,
even if they appear to do it. So,
yeah, well, even if they're doing it well for themselves, it's still a distraction to everyone else. And
yeah.
so, for a long time, I've chosen not to bring a laptop to a meeting.
Mm.
And if I do bring a phone, it's either turned over on the table and pushed like far from me, and or I'll leave that in my pocket, or even leave that at my desk as well. But
Mm.
at one point I realized there's a lot of value in just clearing out anything in between me and the person I'm talking to, or the people I'm talking to. So the best thing I could do is just have an empty blank desk, nothing between me and that person, and you end up in a much deeper connection. And I think it's so important. Now, because we're mostly online, I've done a different thing, and you'll notice it where I'm at right now. This is not just like for a podcast setup. This is
Mm.
how I take meetings, is with this angle. And what you don't see is that my double monitors that all of us, computer geeks have, is
Yeah.
over to my right. And I'm just looking at a screen that I see you, and I have the camera, and I I to be honest, with my eyesight, can't do anything on this screen other than see
Mm.
you. Like, I can't read emails, I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And so what it does is, it means that there's no distractions for you and me.
Mm.
And if I do need to do something, like let's say I'm going to present a PowerPoint to you or something, you will see me turn towards my screen. And so we both know
So we both know that that's what you're doing.
that
Yeah.
I'm focused on something else. And
Mm.
so it puts both, it lets you know that something's going on, but also it puts like some accountability on me to stay focused in
Yeah.
on the conversation. Now, these are all tricks that I have to do because, again, one of my challenges is this whole I will easily lose the focus. I will lose the presence, if I don't use some of those tricks. So
One thing you mentioned before was some things about past things. I think one thing I see a lot of people do is they tend to dwell a lot on past things,
mm,
but importantly, they're often things that they can't change anyway.
yeah,
And I think it's somewhere along the way I learned a lesson that said you just need to move on. Like, I mean, if you
yeah,
cannot change something in the past, all you can let it do is sort of destroy something that you're doing now.
yeah. Yeah, you see it all the time. We spend so much energy either on worrying about the past or worrying about the future, right? Regretting the past, worrying about the future. And the only thing that we can do is focus on what we're doing right at this moment. That's the only thing we have control over, right?
Mm.
I've been reading the book by Dale Carnegie, which is, I think, How to Stop Worrying and Enjoying Your Life. I'm not getting that right. I could put it in the show notes, but it's a great book around, and it's written like a long time ago, right? Like in the early last
Yeah.
century. And but it's the same thing, which is just, look, you got to compartmentalize your day. You can't solve tomorrow's problems today, and you can't
Mm.
fix yesterday's problems. And so get back to worrying about what you can do to better your situation right now. So,
One thing that I really quite loved, actually, there's an old Chinese story where they've got a whole lot of older monks, and a new monk comes along into a Buddhist monk, and he's looking for all sorts of wisdom from uh,
mhm.
the uh, the most senior monk there, and all the senior monk says to him is, "Wash your bowl." and it was, and it's just
That's,
you need to think about what you have to do right
yeah,
now and focus on that. And it's just there's this amazing old story about wash your bowl.
yeah, yeah. It's the one thing you can do right now. It's like, and I've had moments in my life where I've been better at this than others, but the whole make your bed when you get out of bed in the morning. It's one
Mhm.
thing I can control and get done right now before anything else, like, diverts my day. So,
The second thing you mentioned as a main point was investing in relationships. So
yeah.
I suppose, yeah, the thoughts that you have around that.
When I look past, or when I've looked over the last 20 years at Microsoft and even beyond that, many of the opportunities that I've had and many of the things that I've been able to do that I'm most proud of came through relationships, right? And so that was this whole like realization that I wish somebody taught me that back in college. We were talking about like giving your younger self advice. Like, this is a place
Mm.
I love to give myself, my younger self advice. And it's that relationships are one of the most important things you can cultivate in both personally and professionally, right? I think relationships end up being the thing that helps you through the tough moments in your career, and
Yeah.
it's also they're also the people that you end up celebrating with when there's
Hmm.
accomplishments, and and it's also the place that I feel most rewarded. Like when I've been part of, whether I caused it or not, if I've been part of someone else's success, when I look back, I typically even remember those things more than I remember my own successes.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm so much more prouder of the people who I see now go off and become an executive somewhere, or a partner within Microsoft, who've even gone beyond where I've gotten inside Microsoft. But
Mm.
I've had the opportunity to be part of their journey and help them in some small way, and that that is something I'm truly proud of. But then they've also helped me, at times when I needed, extra support during the pandemic because I was stretched between time zones trying to manage people. And so having some people I could just call and say, I don't know what I'm doing right now, and that they could help me through it. That was super important, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's a big part of just, first being present so I can be here for people, for the things that are in front of me, but then making it more um, intentional around, like, what am I doing to build these relationships, right?
Mm. Yeah, it's an odd question I get from people at times where they'll see that you're doing something for someone that doesn't necessarily have any direct outcome or things like that.
Yeah.
And there's often this sort of, why are you doing this? Particularly if you're busy and you've got lots of other things on the go as well. But it's just, you never know in the future how many times something will come up because of some relationship you've built along the way. And yeah,
Hmm.
I think that's just super important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. Is you just never know. Like, it's not something that you plan for. It's not like I build a relationship with Greg, and then
Hmm.
later on, I know that some podcast is going to come opportunity,
Yeah.
right? It's more, you build these relationships, and then um, they pay themselves forward at some point in ways that you can't expect. So,
You also had grow with purpose was
mhm.
the term you used. So what's the thinking there?
Yeah, and as with the other ones, there's multiple sides to that. One is actively seeking ways to grow, and there's
Hmm.
two ways I talk about in the book. One is asking and appreciating feedback. And I learned that early in my time at Microsoft, when I realized that a manager was giving me feedback and it hurt at first. It actually, I
Yeah.
remembered shedding tears over feedback that I got at one point. But then I took the feedback and I improved, and that same manager came back and rewarded me later, both with thanks and gratitude, and also with a better performance review that year.
Mm.
And so I realized at that moment that I always want to have a manager that gives good feedback. And it goes without, with other people in the team too, like seeking out feedback from others, whether positive or negative, is so important to growth.
Mm.
The other aspect of growth in the book is around stepping into something before you're ready. Like
Yeah.
every role we take on, every challenge is something we're not ready for in life.
Hmm.
Otherwise, life gets boring, right? And so realizing that, and realizing that you don't have to find the perfect next role. You want to have some strengths you take into it, but those strengths are things that you're bringing with you. But
Mm.
then you don't have to be 100% ready for it. And so a big one for me was when I first became a manager. They just kind of threw me into it. There was no training. I was, like big eyed, like, what? I'm going to be a manager. And it was kind of a disaster at first, but eventually got better. And the people who were there at the beginning will remember the disaster it is, but we were all better for it in the end because we all grew together. Um, but then,
It's funny you
yeah,
mentioned about the direct feedback
yeah,
because it's when we were talking about the regional director program before, it was fairly
uh-huh,
common for us to be involved in speaking at like big events like Tech Ed and things like that.
yeah,
And one of the things that they used to do at Tech Ed, they made available to speakers before you'd go and speak in these big rooms, with thousands of people or something, was to give you the opportunity to spend time with a big room speaker trainer,
Mm-hmm.
and go along and do that. I found that extraordinarily good to
Yeah.
do that. But what was interesting were a number of the others who went to that, who came away upset because they thought he was a bit abrasive or a bit
Yeah.
whatever. And I used to think, he's not there to be your friend. He's,
Yeah.
you don't just want the positive feedback. You want something that says, this is what you
Yeah.
really need to change.
Well, you have 100 friends to give you positive feedback, right? Like, but
Yeah.
this person was there to help improve you, right?
And
And
look, I
yeah, it was
found it
painful.
also with local events, like we had the local Tech Eds and Ignites and all these different things, or even user groups. And one of the things I always valued is I have some friends who themselves are good speakers, and they would stand in the back of the room and they would give me really, really good feedback, where anybody else in the room is going to say, yeah, that was good, that was great, thanks, whatever. But I have friends who'd be at the back who'd then later say, I think you could improve this by doing this, or I think,
Mhm.
and so on and so on. And I always thought it's just incredibly valuable to have those sort of people, and you have to be prepared to do that for them as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And
Mm.
again, it's one of those things that's not comfortable to be told
Nope.
that, this thing or that thing is not good, but in the end, that's how you end up realizing it and being able to grow
Mm.
from it. So that's
And you
grow
also
with purpose.
mentioned
Yeah.
take the lead was
Uh-huh.
another main point. And was this about the stepping up or something more?
I
Like
think,
what
yeah,
you don't.
take the lead is more realizing that you don't need to have authority to lead. You
Hmm.
don't need to be given a title that says you're the manager or you're the boss
No.
or any of that to take the lead. And it also doesn't have to be, we always think about like, oh, that person's such a leader. But we all have the opportunity to kind of think about the principles of what we're doing and think about how our actions are impacting others in our team or impacting our customers, and to make the right decisions, and go and build coalitions within a company of people who want to achieve the same thing, right? That those are all
Hmm.
like things that are opportunities in the moment, just to take the lead. And that's what that particular part is about. And I've seen so many people like just not realize the opportunity they have to have a positive impact for themselves and for the people around them, because they felt like they're not the leader. Well, you are the leader.
Mm.
You just have to choose to kind of take those steps.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the take the lead areas.
That's great. And the final thing you mentioned was choose what matters.
Yeah. My editor is AI, by the way. So just
Hmm.
to be clear, but I had many arguments with AI over the name for the last one, which came out Choose What
Hmm.
Matters. And the reason is because at first was Be Lazy. That was the name of the fifth move. And every time I put it through this editor prompt, it would say, you might want to change the fifth
It says
meaningful
be
move. People
lazy.
might not
Although I think
understand Be
you
Lazy.
did mention that a number of times in the book, actually. I
I do. I
remember
still
things
It's still
about
a
be
theme in the
lazy.
book. It's just
Mm.
it wanted me to change and so finally I gave in to the AI and changed it to Choose What Matters. But a big theme of that is this idea of be lazy that I became kind of infamous for in Japan, is so counterculture, to say be lazy, which is why it took off here. But it's just this idea of like, first of all, automate everything you can, because
Yeah.
and we as engineers like know that, right? Like you automate deployments, you automate tests, you automate everything so that you can get back focused on the thing that is meaningful, which is the business value you're trying to create in your code, not trying to figure out how to get your code up into a cloud or something. And so that's part of be lazy. And then the other part is just like getting rid of all of the other busyness that doesn't count in your life. We talked about meetings a little bit, right? Like,
Mm.
do you really need to go to these meetings? And if you're going to the meeting and you are just answering emails on your laptop, did you really need to
Yeah,
be in that
what was the
room?
point?
Right. And so it's, again, choosing what matters, automating the things that you can so that you can get more focused in on the meaningful work and also those other meaningful moves like the relationships, etc. And so I think it's important now, like especially with AI coming in, like how, like I, as much as AI might be a threat to my profession, right? Which, we could debate, but
To some
I
degree.
embrace
Yeah.
it, right? I embrace it because it lets me get rid of things that just take time and busyness, and lets me
Just
focus
busy
in.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, the busy work, right? It lets me focus in on the things that bring value to Microsoft and our customers.
Yeah, it's I think one of the things I still struggle with myself, even though I use a lot of AI tools like all day, every day, I still find myself doing things that are busy work that I should have got the AI tool to do.
Yeah,
And then I find I have to sort of stop myself, go back and tell it what I really wanted, you know,
yeah,
and then let it sort of do the work at that point. And
that's true. That's true.
the couple of things I find with the tooling that fascinate me though is that I do worry about what the tools learn from, and this
Mm.
is something that somewhere in the back of my mind troubles me quite a bit. To give you an example, I used to do a lot of baseball umpiring when I
Uh-huh.
was, well, I won't say younger, through to a middle age, which is kind of odd for an Australian, I might add. But the thing that's interesting, I'm still in the Umpires Association, and they send me a quiz like every month saying, "Hey, here's a bunch of questions, so just to keep yourself up to date." And I did one recently and I got about 80 something percent. And I was pretty happy with myself. And then I thought, I wonder if a tool like ChatGPT could have beaten me on this.
Mhm.
And so I went back and got it to do it. It only got 42% right.
Really interesting.
Um, and I was completely fascinated. But the thing that interests me the most is it got the hard questions right and it got the easy questions wrong.
Mm. That is interesting.
And that was not what I was expecting, right?
Yeah.
And eventually it dawned on me that when you had the hard things, it's only people who actually understand them that ever discuss them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so the content out there for learning from is actually much better content for some of the difficult topics.
Hmm.
And where if you got to the easy things, everybody's got an opinion on it, and many of them are wrong,
Hmm.
right? And yet the tooling will learn from that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it got confused. It would, even though it somewhere in what it had learned, it didn't distinguish between, say, baseball and softball or things like this. So there were just
Yeah.
things that it was sure about, but it was quite wrong,
Yeah.
in terms of what it had done. So, but it really fascinated me the fact that the harder questions were right and the
Hmm.
easier ones were wrong. That is not what I was expecting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's the mistake that we all, and to be honest, like on a daily basis, I find myself mentally falling back into, to think that because we call it an agent that it has agency, or because we call it a reasoning
Mm,
model that it's actually reasoning. And in the end, it's still really just a random token generator that is
yeah.
has been restricted down so that most of the random tokens it generates look correct.
Mm.
But to your point, if it hasn't been trained on the easy answers, but has a whole bunch of training material on the hard answers, then it would
Well,
get
it's actually, I
right.
think, got too much training material on the easy things,
Oh,
but
okay. So then it
by
gets
people who
confused.
don't know
Yeah.
what they're talking about.
Yeah, that could be true. I was actually like chuckling the other day because I started to think about, and you and I know this, is that, over our years of writing code, you never look back on the code you wrote 6 months or a year ago and say that was great code, right? We always like, oh
No,
my
no.
God, I don't want to see my code from like 6 months ago. but that's what it's all trained on.
Yeah.
So here it is regurgitating code that, we all regret. So
Writing in the first place. Yeah. And if we had a chance, we'd rewrite it anyway,
that's right.
just because we don't like the old code.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, that's pretty much bringing us up to time, though, Drew. I suppose, well, we've mentioned your book. Is there anything else coming up where people will see you or hear from you, or what's happening?
Yeah, I've been spending quite a bit of time on LinkedIn, sharing more around my thoughts around these 5 meaningful moves. So I have a newsletter that I theme, each one based on one of the meaningful moves. That writing will eventually be pulled into some additional books that I want to write around
Yeah.
each of the
Yeah, I saw a
areas.
detailed one you'd posted in the last day or so. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
yeah. And so I'm working on that content. I translated the book to Japanese. So if you have any Japanese listeners, that's
Excellent.
been fun. Actually, the Japanese edition is even more popular than the English edition, which is really interesting to see people inside the culture in Japan in the business environment react to the messages there and value it. And so I'm looking at doing a few more translations because with all the tools we have now, it's really not that hard
Yeah.
to do that. And so those are those are some of the projects I've been
No,
working on.
that's excellent. One question I will finish with, though, is do you see yourself staying in a technical role to retirement?
I hope so.
Hmm.
I have no plans to leave the technical role. I do very much like mentoring and coaching, and so I've thought somewhat about making that a either I don't want to call it a side hustle that kind of demeans it, but
Hmm.
like getting certification and making that a little bit more official. Um, but I have not yet gotten the inertia to get
Yeah,
off my butt and do it. So, but
terrific.
I would like to do that at some point.
Well, listen, thanks so very much for your time today, Drew.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for inviting me. It was great to reconnect and talk to you.
All good. Great. Thanks.